The alley was a dead end. I knew it the second I slammed into the cold, unforgiving brick wall at the back, the impact knocking the already scarce air from my lungs. Rain plastered my thin dress to my skin, chilling me to the bone, but the cold was nothing compared to the ice flooding my veins. Trapped. Footsteps echoed behind me, splashing through the puddles in the narrow, garbage-strewn alleyway. 2 sets. Heavy, deliberate, unhurried. They knew they had me. Nowhere left to run, little mouse. A voice rasped, thick with an accent I couldn't place, but heavy with menace. My breath came in ragged, tearing gasps. I pressed myself back against the wet bricks, my eyes darting wildly, searching for an escape that wasn't there. A rusted fire escape ladder, missing its lower rungs. Overflowing dumpsters. A sheer slick wall. Nothing. They emerged from the shadows at the alley mouth, blocking the only way out. 2 large men, their faces obscured by the hoods of their dark raincoats, but their shapes radiating a brutal, predatory intent. I didn't know who they were, only that they had appeared out of nowhere half an hour ago. Their black sedan cutting me off as I walked home from my late shift at the diner. Why me? I was nobody. A waitress, barely scraping by, living in a tiny studio apartment. I had nothing worth taking. Unless it was me they wanted. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Please, I choked out, my voice barely a whisper. What do you want? I don't have any money. The taller one chuckled, a low, ugly sound. Not after money, Kiska. Boss wants you. Boss? What boss? I didn't know anyone important enough to have a boss who sent men like this. They started walking toward me, slow, deliberate, savoring my terror. Panic, raw and primal, clawed its way up my throat. No. I wasn't going to just stand here. I wasn't going to let them take me. I spun, my eyes locking onto the only possible path. Back the way I came, through them. It was suicide. But staying here was worse. With a strangled cry, I launched myself forward, ducking low, aiming for the small gap between them. One of them lunged, his hand grabbing for my arm. I twisted, slippery with rain, and his fingers slid off my sleeve. I was past them. I burst out of the alley mouth and onto the rain-slicked sidewalk of the main street, gasping for air, my heart threatening to explode. Freedom. But I didn't look. I didn't check. I just ran. Straight into a wall. Not brick this time. A wall of solid, immovable muscle, draped in expensive, rain-darkened wool. The impact sent me reeling backward, my feet skidding on the wet pavement. I would have fallen hard but large, incredibly strong hands shot out, grabbing my upper arms, steadying me with a grip like steel bands. I looked up, dazed, blinking rain from my eyes. Straight into the coldest, palest blue eyes I had ever seen. He was a giant. Even taller, broader than the men chasing me. His face was carved from granite, harsh and unforgiving, framed by dark, wet hair plastered to his forehead. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit and overcoat, looking utterly unfazed by the downpour. Like a force of nature the storm wouldn't dare inconvenience. He radiated an aura of absolute, lethal stillness. Behind me, I heard the heavy footsteps pounding closer. Let go, I gasped, struggling against his iron grip, desperate to run again, though I had nowhere to go. He didn't release me. His gaze flickered past me, down the street toward the alley mouth where my pursuers were emerging, their menacing shapes silhouetted against the dim light. His expression didn't change, but something tightened in his jaw. Please, I cried, the terror finally breaking through, raw and absolute. I stopped struggling and just clung to the front of his expensive coat, my voice shattering. They're chasing me. He looked down at me then. His cold, pale eyes met mine. He saw the genuine life-or-death panic etched onto my face, the tears mixing with the rain. He didn't speak. He didn't reassure me. He simply shifted. He moved his massive body slightly, placing himself fully between me and the alley entrance, shielding me with his sheer size. One hand remained clamped on my arm, pinning me safely behind him. The 2 men skidded to a halt a few feet away, their faces finally visible in the streetlight. Hard, brutal, surprised to find their prey suddenly guarded by a wolf. They looked at him. They looked at his size, his suit, the almost invisible bulge under his left armpit. They looked at the utter lack of fear, the cold, deadly annoyance in his glacial eyes. And they hesitated. He said nothing. He just stared back. A predator challenging lesser beasts. One of the men muttered something guttural to the other. They exchanged a look. Then, slowly, deliberately, they began to back away, melting back into the shadows of the alley, disappearing as quickly as they had appeared. They were gone. My legs gave out. I sagged against him, my forehead pressed into the damp wool of his chest, my body shaking uncontrollably with reaction. He still hadn't spoken. His hand was still locked on my arm. He was solid, immovable, radiating a heat that felt like a furnace against the cold rain. He had saved me. This terrifying stranger. After a long moment, his voice finally rumbled, low and gravelly, directly above my head. Moya. Mine. The single, possessive Russian word, spoken with such cold, absolute certainty, sent a new and entirely different kind of chill down my spine. He hadn't just saved me. He had claimed me. And the look in his eyes when he finally looked down at me again, it wasn't kindness. It wasn't concern. It was the look of a man who had just found something he wasn't ever going to let go. Okay, my heart is still pounding. That was intense. Running for your life and crashing right into him. Where are you watching from tonight? Is it raining there too, or is it sunny? Let me know in the comments. If you need to know what happens next, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell, so you don't miss what's about to unfold. The word echoed in the sudden, ringing silence left by the retreating footsteps. Moya. Mine. It settled over me, heavier than the rain-soaked wool of his coat, colder than the icy fear that still gripped my heart. The immediate threat, the men in the alley, had vanished like phantoms, banished by the sheer, immovable presence of the man holding me. But the word mine, spoken in that low, gravelly Russian accent, promised a different kind of danger. A slower, more insidious entrapment. My legs were still trembling, barely supporting me. I was leaning heavily against him, my forehead pressed into his chest, the damp fabric rough against my skin. His hand remained clamped around my upper arm. A manacle of warm, living steel. He hadn't loosened his grip. If anything, it felt tighter, more definitive. He was still looking down at me, his face unreadable in the dim, rain-streaked streetlight. Those pale, glacial eyes seemed to pierce right through me, seeing not just the terrified waitress, Elina Petrova, but something deeper, something broken, something he had now decided belonged to him. You are cold, he stated, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't concern. It was an observation. A statement of fact. Like noting the rain was wet. He finally released my arm, but only to shrug off his heavy, exquisitely tailored overcoat. Before I could react, he draped it around my shoulders. It was enormous, swallowing me whole. The hem dragging on the wet pavement. But it was warm. Impossibly warm, lined with silk and carrying his scent. That cold cedar and something else, something sharp and metallic, like ozone before a storm. The weight of it felt like another chain, settling me deeper into his possession. Come, he commanded. He didn't offer his arm. He didn't wait to see if I would follow. He simply turned and strode toward the black, menacing SUV that waited, engine humming silently, a few feet away. His driver, Boris, a silent giant, materialized from the shadows and opened the rear door. My feet felt like lead. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee in the opposite direction, to take my chances with the nameless men in the alley rather than face this cold, silent predator. But where would I go? Back to my tiny apartment they somehow knew about? Back to the diner where someone, Sergei, might be waiting? He had saved me. But the price was already becoming terrifyingly clear. He reached the car and turned, his pale eyes finding me where I stood frozen, drowning in his coat. He didn't look impatient. He just waited, utterly confident that I would obey, that I had no other choice. And he was right. Shivering, clutching the heavy coat around me, I stumbled toward the open door. The interior was a cavern of black leather and polished wood, utterly silent, sealed off from the storm outside. It smelled like him. I slid onto the seat, sinking into the plush leather. He followed, folding his massive frame into the space beside me with a surprising fluid grace. He wasn't crowded. He commanded the space. Boris closed the door with a soft, heavy thud, plunging us into near darkness, lit only by the faint ambient glow from the dashboard. The partition slid up with a silent hum. Trapped. Again. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding through the rain-slick streets with impossible smoothness. I stared out the window, watching the familiar neighborhood. My neighborhood, slide past, transformed into something alien and menacing through the tinted glass. He said nothing. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring straight ahead, his granite profile unreadable, his large hands resting loosely on his knees. He seemed utterly relaxed, completely in control. The absolute stillness of him was more terrifying than any overt threat. Who were those men? I finally whispered, the question tearing itself from my tight throat. He turned his head slowly. His pale eyes seemed to glow faintly in the dark. Problems, he said, his voice a low, dismissive rumble. Flies. Swatted. But why were they after me? I don't know anyone. I don't have anything. You were there, he stated simply. As if my mere existence in the wrong place at the wrong time was reason enough to be hunted. Or perhaps reason enough to be claimed. It does not matter now. They will not return. The chilling finality in his voice left no room for doubt. He hadn't just scared them off. He had dealt with them. Or would. Where are you taking me? I asked, my voice trembling. Somewhere safe, he replied. He looked away, back toward the front. Somewhere warm. You require attention. Attention. Like a stray animal he'd picked up. Not care. Not help. Attention. We drove for what felt like an hour, leaving the familiar city streets behind, heading toward the glittering towers of Midtown. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The silence in the car stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken questions, unvoiced threats. He didn't ask my name. He didn't ask where I lived. He already knew, or he didn't care. I was simply the creature he had found in the rain, the thing he had declared mine. Finally, the car descended into another one of those impossibly clean, brightly lit private underground garages. This one was even grander than the last, lined with exotic cars that looked like spaceships. Boris opened his door. Maxim Morozov got out. He didn't look back. I scrambled out after him, clutching his coat, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He was already striding toward a bank of private elevators, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He pressed his thumb to a scanner. An elevator arrived instantly, its doors whispering open. We stepped inside. Mirrors and dark, gleaming steel. My reflection was a small, pale, drowned thing beside his towering, dark presence. The elevator ascended, fast and silent. He pressed a button. Penthouse. Of course. The doors opened directly into a space that stole my breath. It was vast, minimalist, walls of glass revealing a staggering, God's-eye view of the city. Bookshelves lined some walls, abstract sculptures stood on pedestals, and a massive grand piano gleamed darkly in one corner. This wasn't just a fortress. This was his lair. He walked into the center of the room, shrugging off his suit jacket and tossing it onto a severe black leather sofa. He ran a hand through his damp, dark hair, momentarily disrupting its perfect severity. I hovered by the elevator, clutching his coat, dripping onto his pristine white marble floor. He turned and looked at me, truly looked at me, his gaze sweeping from my soaked sneakers up to my tangled hair, lingering for a fraction of a second on my rain-plastered dress, my trembling form. You are a mess, Devushka, he stated, his voice flat. He walked to an intercom panel. Katerina, he barked. The severe housekeeper materialized from a doorway, her face an impassive mask. She bowed her head slightly. The Gospodju. Take her, he commanded, gesturing toward me with his chin. Clean her. Clothe her. Put her in the East Suite. He didn't look at me again. He turned and walked toward a massive, dark wooden desk that sat before the wall of windows, already pulling out his phone. He had processed me, dealt with the immediate inconvenience. Now he was back to ruling his world. Katerina approached me, her eyes like chips of flint. Come, she snapped, her voice devoid of any warmth. And do not drip. She grabbed my arm, her fingers pinching, and pulled me away from the elevator, away from the Pakhan, deeper into the heart of his cold, glittering cage. Katerina's grip was like talons, digging into the flesh of my upper arm as she propelled me through the vast, silent penthouse. I stumbled along beside her, my wet sneakers squeaking pathetically on the gleaming white marble. The sheer scale of the place was disorienting. Long corridors stretched into shadows. Doorways hinted at rooms larger than my entire apartment building. And everywhere, the cold, impersonal gleam of extreme wealth. She didn't speak, her silence somehow more menacing than shouted commands. We arrived at a pair of tall, pale gray doors. She pushed them open, revealing a suite that mirrored the cold elegance of the rest of the penthouse. Muted tones of gray and silver, plush, deep carpets, minimalist furniture that looked both uncomfortable and astronomically expensive. Another wall of glass offered a different, equally terrifying panorama of the city lights. Bathroom, Katerina snapped, pointing to a frosted glass door. Remove that. She gestured with undisguised contempt at my cheap, rain-soaked diner uniform. Vash. Soroli. She released my arm, leaving angry red marks where her fingers had been. I backed away, rubbing the sore flesh, my eyes darting around the room. It was beautiful, undeniably, but it felt like a display case, sterile and unwelcoming. Katerina walked to a large built-in closet, sliding open a door. Inside, rows of clothes hung with military precision. Soft sweaters, tailored pants, silk blouses, all in shades of gray, white and black. She pulled out a set, gray cashmere sweatpants, a white long-sleeved t-shirt, thick wool socks. These, she said, tossing them onto the large, uninviting bed. Dress. Then wait. I will bring sustenance. She pronounced the last word as if it were distasteful. She turned to leave, her hand on the door. Do not explore, she warned, her dark eyes like chips of flint. This wing is yours. The rest is not. The door clicked shut behind her. I didn't hear a lock this time, but the implied threat was just as effective. I fled into the bathroom, locking the door behind me, a small, futile gesture. This bathroom was another symphony of marble and chrome, cold and vast. I stripped off my wet clothes, leaving them in a heap, a pathetic reminder of the girl I used to be just hours ago. The shower was hot, powerful and utterly impersonal. I scrubbed my skin until it felt raw, trying to wash away the fear, the grime of the alley, the lingering terror of the men who had chased me. But I couldn't wash away the feeling of his hand on my arm, the chilling finality in his voice, the possessive weight of his coat. Stepping out, wrapped in a towel thick enough to be a blanket, I felt stripped bare. Vulnerable. My reflection showed a pale, thin young woman with wide, haunted eyes and tangled, dripping hair. There was a faint bruise blooming on my cheekbone where I'd hit the wall in the alley, and my lip felt slightly swollen. I dressed in the clothes he'd provided. They were impossibly soft, luxurious against my abused skin. But they felt wrong. Alien. They weren't me. They were the costume of the Pakhan's new acquisition. They fit perfectly, of course. Katerina returned minutes later, entering without knocking this time, confirming the futility of the lock. She placed a tray on a small table by the window. A bowl of steaming soup, thick slices of dark bread, a glass of water. She eyed my wet hair with disapproval. There is a drying apparatus in the bathroom, she sniffed. Use it. The Господин does not tolerate untidiness. She left again, pulling the door shut with another soft click. I ate the soup mechanically. It was rich, flavorful, probably made by a private chef. My body craved the warmth and nourishment, but my mind was numb. Each bite felt like a confirmation of my captivity. I was being fed, clothed, sheltered, kept. After eating, I dried my hair with the powerful dryer, the hot air a small comfort. I felt marginally more human, but the reflection staring back was still a stranger. Cleaner, dressed in cashmere, but with the same hunted look in her eyes. Exhaustion finally claimed me. I crawled onto the massive bed, too intimidated to get under the perfectly arranged duvet. I curled into a ball on top, pulling his heavy coat, which Katerina had apparently retrieved and left folded at the foot of the bed, over me like a shield. It still smelled of him. Cold cedar and power. I fell asleep clutching it, adrift in a cold, silent palace in the sky. I woke abruptly, gasping, my heart pounding. A nightmare? No. A sound. Someone was in the suite. I sat bolt upright, clutching the coat, my eyes darting wildly in the dim pre-dawn light filtering through the glass wall. He was there, standing by the window, his back to me, perfectly still. A massive silhouette against the first, pale gray streaks of dawn. Maxim Morozov. He hadn't made a sound entering. How long had he been there? Watching me sleep. Terror, cold and absolute, seized me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He turned slowly. His face was unreadable in the shadows, but I could feel the weight of his gaze. "You slept," he stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble in the silence. I just nodded, unable to speak, clutching his coat like a child's blanket. He walked toward the bed. Not quickly. Slowly. Deliberately. Like a predator approaching, assessing. He stopped a few feet away, looming over me. "The men," he said, his voice flat. "From the alley. They will not trouble you again." I flinched at the confirmation, the chilling finality. Erased. Problems solved. Why? I finally whispered the word raw. "Why me?" He looked down at me, curled on his bed, wrapped in his coat. His expression didn't soften, but something flickered in the depths of those icy eyes. Curiosity? Possessiveness? "Why does the wolf keep the bird it finds shivering in the snow?" he murmured, almost to himself. "Perhaps because it is unexpected. Perhaps because it is his to keep." He reached out, his large hand moving toward my face. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for I didn't know what. His fingers, rough and calloused, brushed against the faint bruise on my cheekbone. His touch was surprisingly gentle, almost clinical. An inspection. "You are marked," he whispered, his voice thick with a sudden cold anger. Not anger at me. Anger at the mark. At the imperfection. At the sign that someone else had dared to touch his new possession. He pulled his hand back. "Katerina, will bring ointment. The mark will fade." He spoke as if issuing an order to my skin. He turned and walked toward the door. "Rest," he commanded. "Later, we will talk." He left, the door closing silently behind him. I was alone again, my cheek tingling where he had touched it. He hadn't hurt me. He hadn't threatened me. But his touch, his words, his cold, possessive gaze, they had branded me more surely than any physical mark. I was his bird, found shivering, now kept warm in his gilded cage. And the wolf had no intention of letting me go. The next few days passed in a disorienting, luxurious blur. I remained confined to the East Suite, a prisoner in paradise. Katerina continued her silent, efficient ministrations, delivering trays of food that tasted like ashes in my mouth, and ensuring the suite remained unervingly perfect. She brought ointments for my fading bruise, creams for my chapped lips, brushes for my tangled hair, small, impersonal gestures that felt less like care and more like the maintenance of valuable property. Maxim Morozov remained a ghost. He didn't return to my suite. I didn't see him in the hallways. The only evidence of his presence was the subtle tension that permeated the air whenever I sensed he was home, a change in the quality of the silence, a feeling of being watched even when I was alone behind my unlocked door. The unlocked door was its own form of psychological torture. He could have locked it. He chose not to. It was a statement, a demonstration of his absolute confidence that I couldn't leave. He was right. Where would I go? The image of him standing by the SUV, offering me the illusion of choice, was burned into my mind. I had chosen the cage. Without my phone, without a computer, without even a book that wasn't in Russian, my world shrank to the four walls of the suite. The silence pressed in, broken only by the whisper of the ventilation and the distant, imagined echo of footsteps in the corridor. I spent hours standing on the balcony, breathing the cold air, watching the unchanging panorama of the woods and the distant city. I felt like Rapunzel, trapped in a tower, but there was no prince coming. Only the Pakhan who had put me there. On the fourth morning after he had touched my face, Katerina arrived not with breakfast, but with an instruction. "The Господин requires you," she stated, her voice flat, her eyes avoiding mine. "In his office." Now, my heart leaped into my throat. His office. The inner sanctum. The place where, I had no doubt, decisions of life and death were made. "Why?" I whispered, my hands suddenly cold. "You do not ask why," Katerina snapped, her patience fraying. "You go." She held out a simple, elegant gray wool dress. Dress. Beats presentable. And quick. My hands were trembling as I took the dress. It was soft, expensive, and utterly devoid of character. Another piece of the uniform. I dressed quickly, my reflection showing a pale, wide-eyed stranger in borrowed finery. Katerina waited by the door, tapping her foot impatiently. She led me out of my wing, across the vast, echoing gallery, past the closed doors of his private quarters, I assumed, and stopped before a pair of massive, imposing doors identical to my own, but crafted from dark, almost black, polished wood. They looked ancient, impenetrable. Katerina didn't knock. She simply pushed one open and stepped aside, gesturing for me to enter. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. Then, taking a shaky breath, I stepped inside. The doors closed silently behind me. It was like stepping into the heart of a storm. The room was vast, dominated by a desk that looked like it had been carved from the hull of a Viking ship. A single massive slab of dark, scarred wood. Behind it, the wall was not glass, but a bank of monitors displaying complex financial data, security feeds, and maps dotted with glowing markers. The air smelled of old leather, expensive cigars, and his cold cedar cologne. Bookshelves lined the other walls, filled not with classics but with imposing leather-bound ledgers and technical manuals. It was a command center, a war room, and he was there. Maxim Morozov sat behind the massive desk, leaning back in a high-backed leather chair that was more throne than seat. He wasn't in a suit. He wore a simple dark gray Henley shirt that stretched across his impossibly broad shoulders, the sleeves pushed up to reveal scarred forearms dusted with dark hair. He looked less like a Pakhan and more like a warrior chieftain. He wasn't looking at me. He was focused intently on one of the monitors, his granite profile sharp, his jaw set. He didn't acknowledge my entrance. I stood awkwardly just inside the door, feeling small, insignificant, an unwelcome interruption. The silence stretched, thick with tension. I could hear the faint hum of the computers, the soft ticking of a large, antique clock on the mantelpiece above a dark, unlit fireplace. Finally, without looking away from the screen, he spoke. "You wished to discuss your future." It wasn't quite the word I'd expected. I swallowed, finding my voice. Yes. I need to understand. What happens now? Why am I here? He finally turned his head. Slowly. His pale eyes, icy and assessing, swept over me, taking in the gray dress, my rigid posture, the fear I couldn't entirely hide. "You require purpose," he rumbled. He gestured, not unkindly, toward one of two severe, black leather chairs positioned before his desk. "Seat." I sat on the edge of the chair, my back ramrod straight. It felt like an interrogation. He swiveled his massive chair to face me fully. He leaned forward, resting his powerful forearms on the desk, his hands clasped loosely. The sheer physical presence of him, even across the expanse of the desk, was overwhelming. "You are Elina Petrova," he stated. 23. Waitress. No living family. An orphan. Correct. My blood ran cold. He knew. Of course he knew. He knew everything. "Yes," I whispered. "You live alone. You work late. You walk home. Through bad streets." His voice was flat, reciting facts, but there was an undercurrent of disapproval? Anger? "You are vulnerable." "I was managing," I said, a spark of defiance lighting. "No," he countered, his voice sharp. "You were lucky. Until you were not. The men who chased you, they were opportunists. Looking for easy prey. You're easy prey, Devushka." The term girl felt dismissive, infantilizing. "So you what? Decided to lock me up for my own good?" A ghost of that cold smile touched his lips. "I decided to remove the risk. By removing you from the equation." "So I'm just a problem you solved? By hiding me away?" "You are an acquisition," he corrected, his voice dropping, becoming possessive. "Found. Claimed. Now secured. An asset requires protection. And purpose." "Purpose?" I asked, bewildered. "What purpose could I possibly serve for you?" He leaned back, his pale eyes fixed on my face. "You saw the house. It is large. Empty. It requires management. Katerina is old. She needs assistance." I stared at him. You want me to be a housekeeper? After everything? After being hunted, rescued, practically abducted? Not housekeeper, he clarified, a hint of impatience in his tone. You will manage the house, the staff, the schedules, the details. You have a good head. You pay attention. I observed you at the diner. He had watched me? Before the alley? The thought sent a new, colder chill down my spine. How long had I been on his radar? You require work, he continued. It is better than staring at the walls. It gives structure. It gives value. Value. To him. And if I refuse? I whispered, though I already knew the answer. He didn't even blink. Refusal is not an option, he said softly. You are here. You stay. You will be useful. Or you will be bored. The choice of how you spend your time is yours. But the time is spent here. He stood up, unfolding himself from the chair. He walked around the massive desk, stopping directly in front of me, forcing me to crane my neck to look up at him. He loomed, a mountain casting a long shadow. You are valuable, Elina, he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly vibration. Your resilience is noted. Your survival. His eyes flickered, that cold fire returning. Is mine now. I will protect it. I will utilize it. And you, in return, will have everything. He gestured vaguely around the opulent, fortified room. Safety, wealth, comfort. A world without fear, without weakness. He leaned down, his face close to mine, his icy eyes searching my face. Is it not a fair trade? I couldn't answer. I could only stare up at him, trapped in the gravitational pull of his power, his possession. He was offering me a gilded cage with a job description. Manage his fortress. Be his useful bird. And the most terrifying part was, the alternative, starving in silence, staring at the walls, was somehow worse. Manage his house. Be useful. The words echoed in the vast silence of his office long after he had left me there. I stood frozen before his massive desk, the scent of cigars and cold power clinging to the air. He hadn't just caged me, he'd given me a job description. A bizarre, terrifyingly domestic purpose within the cold confines of his fortress. Was this his idea of mercy? Or a crueler form of control? Keep the bird busy so it doesn't beat its wings against the bars? My mind recoiled from the implications. Housekeeper. Manager. It felt like a demotion from being a terrified captive, I supposed. But it also felt intentional. He hadn't locked me away to simply possess me like a statue. He wanted me to do something. He wanted me functional. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I gripped the back of the severe leather chair I'd sat in, my knuckles white. The Katerina explained the intricate, clockwork precision of it all. The Gospodin's schedule was absolute, immutable. Breakfast served precisely at 6 a.m. in his private dining room. Car ready at 7 a.m. Specific newspapers laid out. Specific temperature maintained in his office. Dinner served at 8 p.m., unless otherwise instructed. No nois. No disruptions. No imperfections. My role, she explained with thinly veiled scorn, was to oversee her. To review the menus planned by the unseen chef. To approve the schedules she created. To, essentially, be a figurehead, a layer of insulation between the true master and the workings of his domain. He didn't want to be bothered with the details. He just wanted perfection. And now, for some unfathomable reason, I was responsible for ensuring it. You will review these, Katerina said on the second day, dropping a thick binder onto the small desk in my suite. It contained menus for the entire upcoming week, detailed down to the specific vintage of wine to be served, only ever for him, I noted. My trays contained only water. I opened it hesitantly. Poached salmon with dill sauce. Beef stroganoff. Blini with Ostra caviar. It was ludicrous. I, who had lived on instant ramen and diner leftovers, was now supposed to approve menus featuring ingredients I couldn't even pronounce. Is there a budget? I asked tentatively. Katerina actually scoffed. The Господин does not have a budget. I spent hours poring over the binder, not because I had any meaningful input, but because it was something to do. It was a task. A purpose. It kept the crushing silence, the terrifying emptiness at bay. I learned the names of the invisible staff from Katerina's meticulous schedules. I returned to my suite that night, the heavy silence feeling different. It wasn't just empty, it was expectant. I walked not to the bed but to the small, elegant desk tucked into an alcove. But the ding of the elevator never came. Katerina brought my lunch tray in icy silence, snatching the breakfast tray away without a word. Dinner arrived. More silence. But then I remembered Maxim's face. The flicker of something when he spoke of his grandmother's borscht. The challenge in his eyes. Show me if the little bird still remembers how to sing. Yes, chef, I said, lifting my chin, my voice clearer, steadier than I expected. We're making pelmeni. My grandmother's recipe. A ripple of something went through the kitchen staff. A raised eyebrow here, a quickly stifled smirk there. They were watching, waiting for me to fail, waiting for the Pakhan's strange new pet to make a fool of herself. Katerina stood by the door, her arms crossed, her face a thundercloud. She was radiating disapproval. Very well, Jean-Pierre sighed, gesturing to a pristine stainless steel workstation. The ingredients have been procured, as per your list. He'd followed my list exactly. Flour, eggs, ground meat, a mix of beef and pork, as I'd specified. Onions, garlic, salt, pepper, dill. Simple. Honest. My hands felt clumsy at first. This kitchen was intimidating, the bowls too large, the utensils too heavy. But then he turned and strode out of the kitchen, leaving behind a wake of frozen silence and my own hammering heart. He hadn't praised me. He hadn't condemned me. He had corrected me, like a master offering a critique. But as Jean-Pierre let out a shaky breath beside me, and the kitchen slowly, cautiously, returned to life, I knew something had shifted. I wasn't just the pet anymore. I wasn't just the problem to be managed. I was the one who knew how to make pelmeni. And in this cold, empty palace, that simple, rustic knowledge, it was a form of power. A tiny, fragile flicker of defiance, served in a bowl, that the Pakhan himself had acknowledged. The cage felt, just for that moment, a little less like a prison, and a little more like a beginning. Winter had come and gone, melting away under a hesitant spring sun that now streamed, bold and warm, through the massive glass walls of the penthouse. 6 months. 6 months since I had crashed into Maxim Morozov's world. A terrified, rain-soaked creature running for her life. I stood not in my suite, but in the heart of the fortress, the main kitchen. It was no longer an alien landscape. It was familiar, comfortable even. The morning sun glinted off the copper pots hanging overhead. The air smelled not of fear or sterile silence, but of yeast, dark coffee, and something savory simmering on the stove. Shkai, a cabbage soup I was teaching the now less skeptical Jean-Pierre to make. My hands, steady now, moved with practiced ease, kneading dough for dark rye bread on a floured section of the vast stainless steel counter. I wore not the anonymous gray uniform, but simple black trousers and a soft, deep green sweater, a color I had chosen. My hair was tied back in a simple braid. The bruise on my cheekbone was a long faded memory. The fear, it was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but it no longer paralyzed me. My role in the house had solidified. I was not merely the manager. I was the mistress of the domestic sphere, in a strange, unspoken way. Katerina still bristled, still radiated disapproval, but her challenges were less frequent now. Her obedience to my menu choices grudging but absolute. The other staff treated me with a cautious, watchful respect. I was the gospodin's something, and that commanded a certain deference. The kitchen doors swung open. The staff, who had been moving with their usual quiet efficiency, froze. A familiar, electric tension snapped into the air. Maxim Morozov stood there. He was dressed not for business, but for the weekend. Dark jeans, soft leather boots, a thick, dark blue fisherman's sweater that somehow made his massive frame seem even more imposing. He looked relaxed. Almost. The predatory stillness was always there, just beneath the surface. His pale eyes scanned the kitchen, taking in the simmering pots, the rising dough, the staff frozen in place. Then his gaze landed on me, standing by the counter, my hands dusted with flour. He walked toward me, his heavy boots silent on the tile floor. The staff melted away, finding urgent tasks in distant corners. He stopped beside me, close enough that I could smell the faint, clean scent of the outdoors clinging to him, mingling with the warm aroma of the bread. "You make bread," he observed, his voice a low rumble. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. I didn't stop kneading. Continuing my work, my purpose, felt like the only anchor I had in his presence. He watched my hands for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "My grandmother, she made bread. Dark. Heavy. Like earth." "Rye bread," I confirmed softly. "This is similar." He reached out, his large hand hovering over the dough. He didn't touch it. He just seemed to feel the life in it. "Katerina complains," he stated, his gaze shifting to my face. "You spend too much time in the kitchen. Not enough managing." "The kitchen needs managing," I countered, meeting his gaze. "And sometimes managing requires doing." A ghost of that rare, terrifying smile touched his lips. You still fight." He seemed pleased. He leaned against the counter beside me, crossing his arms over his massive chest. He wasn't leaving. He was observing, settling in. We stayed like that for a while, in a silence that was no longer tense, but companionable. The only sounds were the rhythmic push and fold of my hands in the dough, the gentle simmer of the soup, the distant hum of the city far below. "The men," I said finally, my voice low, hesitant. I hadn't dared ask before. "The ones from the alley. You said they wouldn't return. What happened to them?" He didn't stiffen. He didn't evade. He just looked down at my hands, still working the dough. "They were soldati," he murmured. "Soldiers. Foot soldiers. Belonging to a small foolish man, who thought he could poach, on my territory." He paused. "The soldiers were disciplined. Returned to their master. Damaged." Damaged. The word hung in the air, cold and brutal. "And the master?" I whispered. Maxim's gaze lifted, meeting mine. His pale eyes were like chips of ice. Received a message. That his ambitions were unwise. That his soldiers should remain within his own borders. He shrugged slightly. He agreed. Simple. Final. Brutal. A war averted. Territories defined. Lives damaged. All because I had run down the wrong alley. "And it is finished?" I asked. He confirmed. "It is finished. You are bezopasno. Safe." He reached out then, his rough thumb brushing against my cheekbone. The same spot he had touched weeks ago when the bruise was still fresh. His touch was light, almost tentative, but possessive. "Here," he growled softly. "With me." I didn't pull away. I leaned into his touch, just slightly, a subconscious surrender. The warmth of his hand, the sheer undeniable safety of his presence. It was a drug I had become addicted to. He let his hand drop, his expression unreadable again. He pushed himself off the counter. "The bread," he commanded. "When it is ready, bring it. To the library. With butter. Svezhi. Fresh." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving behind the lingering scent of cold air and cedar, and the echo of his possessive claim. I looked down at the dough beneath my hands. It was smooth now, elastic, alive. I had survived. I had adapted. I had found a strange, precarious balance in the Pakhan's world. I was his bird, yes. Still in a cage. But perhaps, just perhaps, I was finally learning not just how to sing, but how to build a nest. What part of Elina and Maxim's story did you find the most intriguing? Was it the terrifying rescue in the rain-soaked alley? The chilling moment he revealed the fate of the men who chased her? Or this final, quiet scene in the kitchen, hinting at a complex, evolving dynamic? Do you think Elina can ever find true happiness or freedom? Or is this gilded cage, protected by the Pakhan, the only life she can have now? What power dynamics will play out as she becomes more integrated into his household? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Please, if you enjoyed this story, I would be so grateful if you would like and subscribe to the channel. Your subscription is a huge support, and it means the world to me as my channel is still young and trying to grow. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next interesting story.